You ever wake up in the morning, stare at yourself in the mirror, and realize you're looking at something that's been assembled, not born assembled? Piece by piece, like a machine that's learned to smile on command. I used to think I was a free man. Then I started teaching philosophy, and that's when the cruel joke hit me. We've all been trained to mistake obedience for freedom. When you were a kid, they didn't need to beat ideas into you. They built them around you. The school bell didn't just tell you when to learn. It taught you when to obey. You learned to stand in lines, to wait your turn, to raise your hand for permission to speak. That's not education. That's conditioning. And the beauty of it is, by the time you're old enough to question it, you don't want to, you call it discipline or work ethic or whatever word makes it sound noble. But what it really is training. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there's some guy in a smoke-filled room designing this whole mess. The system doesn't need a villain. It runs on autopilot, smooth, polite, efficient. The corporations need workers. The media needs viewers. The politicians need believers. So they all sing you the same lullaby. Be yourself. Follow your dreams. Trust the process. They don't tell you that the self you're supposed to be was sold to you in fragments, a hairstyle here, a phone there, a slogan that makes you feel special while you blend in with everyone else who bought the same lie. You see, real control doesn't come from the top down anymore. It's baked into the culture. You don't even notice it because it feels like choice. You pick your job from a list of jobs someone else invented. You pick your clothes from trends someone else approved. You post your opinions on platforms owned by billionaires who profit every time you think you're being authentic. And you call that expression, I call it beautiful, obedience, because you think you're free while doing exactly what you were trained to do. The irony is, we've been trained so well we even police ourselves. You feel guilty when you rest. You feel anxious when you disconnect. You feel worthless if you're not productive. That's not a natural state of being. That's the software of a system that measures your value by your output. You're not a person anymore. You're a performance review, a brand, a resume and sneakers. And people ask me, Rick, are you saying freedom's impossible? No, I'm saying it's rare. Freedom's not some flag you wave or some quote you tweet under a sunset photo. Freedom is awareness. It's that uncomfortable moment when you realize your thoughts aren't entirely your own and you start clawing your way back to something real. But that's hard. That's lonely. Because once you start seeing the gears, you can't go back to believing in the magic trick. I remember a student once told me, Professor Roderick, I feel like everything I do is fake. I told him, congratulations. That's the beginning of philosophy, because you can't start thinking until you've stopped pretending. The problem is, our culture doesn't reward that kind of honesty. It rewards noise, not thought. You can make $1 million selling comfort, but try selling self-awareness. People change the channel. They don't want to hear they're trapped, especially when the prison is decorated with flat screens and fast Wi-Fi. Some nights I look at this world and I think, maybe obedience became the last shared religion. We don't pray anymore, we post. We don't confess, we update. We curate our sins, filter them, add a caption, and call it vulnerability. And deep down, we know it's hollow. But the system doesn't care if you're hollow. As long as you're consistent, keep buying, keep scrolling, keep smiling. The machine doesn't need believers, it needs users. And I'll tell you something strange. Once you see how manufactured your self really is, there's a temptation to despair. You start thinking, maybe there's nothing real left, but that's where philosophy saves you. Not with answers, God, no, but with the courage to stay in that discomfort, to live in the tension between what's fake and what might still be true. Because even if the system built the shell, the cracks are still yours. The cracks are where the light gets in, as that old line goes. Those cracks are your freedom, struggling to breathe. You see, I'm not against civilization. I'm against the hypnosis it sells as happiness. I'm against the smug comfort of people who think consumption equals meaning. The truth is, meaning hurts. It demands you stand naked before your own complicity. And if that sounds heavy, it should. Because you can't build an authentic self without first tearing down the obedient one. Now, I don't have a 10-step plan for escaping the system. That's just another system. What I'm offering is much simpler. Start noticing. Notice how often your desires feel prefabricated. Notice how often you censor yourself before anyone else has to. Notice how much of your freedom depends on approval. And when you catch yourself in the act, don't panic, just breathe. That's the beginning of something like liberation. Because the truth is, we were all trained to behave, but no one trained us to be alive. That part you have to learn on your own, in the quiet, without the screens, without the applause. That's the hard work of being human in an obedient age. And if you're listening to this thinking, well, maybe he's exaggerating, good. Be skeptical. Argue with me. Philosophy should itch, not soothe. But when the noise dies down tonight, and it's just you and your reflection again, ask yourself one question: who built this person I'm pretending to be? And if the answer makes you uneasy, don't look away. That unease is your first honest feeling in a long time. That's where freedom begins. Not in rebellion for show, not in slogans or symbols, but in that private trembling moment when you realize you were built to behave, and you whisper to yourself, not anymore. You know, I used to think the system wanted to scare us. Fear, punishment, control, the old school stuff. That was before I realized how lazy power's become. It doesn't need the whip anymore. It's got Netflix. It's got dopamine. It's got you scrolling at 2 in the morning, convincing yourself you're unwinding. Power figured out the greatest trick of all time. It learned how to entertain you into obedience. When I read Foucault in graduate school, I thought his stuff about surveillance and discipline was terrifying, all those watchtowers, the invisible gaze of authority. But Foucault died before Instagram. He never saw us build the perfect panopticon ourselves and love it. We record our own lives, tag our locations, perform our identities, and beg for the gaze. You don't need a big brother when you've got a front-facing camera. The system isn't a prison anymore, it's a playground. Only the swings are made of your own attention. Nietzsche saw this coming, in his way. He warned that modern man would trade God for comfort, truth for entertainment. He said we'd become the last men, blinking, smiling, content with small pleasures. Look around. We've done it. We anesthetized ourselves with trivia, consumption, and curated outrage. The system doesn't suppress us, it stimulates us. Constantly. Every vibration in your pocket is a leash you volunteered to wear. I teach philosophy, which means I spend half my life watching young people fight to stay awake in a world designed to keep them sedated. And I don't blame them. Why wrestle with Nietzsche when TikTok will spoon-feed you the illusion of novelty every 6 seconds? Why face the void when the void has better lighting and background music? We used to fear that machines would enslave us. Turns out we were happy to hand them the keys, as long as they gave us something shiny to look at on the ride. Here's the dirty secret. The system doesn't even want your soul anymore. That's outdated tech. It wants your time, those tiny, monetizable fragments of attention. Every minute you spend scrolling is another coin in someone else's pocket. And the genius part? You think you're choosing it. You think you're relaxing, staying informed, connecting. You call it freedom, I call it a very elegant form of captivity. When I say the system, I'm not talking about some conspiracy. There's no wizard behind the curtain. It's more like a mood, a cultural current that rewards distraction and punishes depth. You try to talk about meaning at a party and watch how fast the conversation changes to streaming shows or gadgets. It's not that people are stupid, it's that seriousness feels like bad manners now. The system made irony safer than sincerity. You can joke about anything as long as you don't believe in it. This is how pleasure became political. Every product promises to make you feel good, express yourself, escape the grind. But what you're escaping into is another loop of the same seduction. Your identity becomes your consumption, your rebellion becomes another trend, even dissent is a subscription service now. Buy the t-shirt, post the hashtag, call it activism. The system doesn't mind, it sells both the uniform and the rebellion. It's a perfect circle, a feedback loop of desire and distraction. You see, control used to be visible. Chains, rules, hierarchies, you could see your oppressor. Now it's invisible, wrapped in the language of choice and self-expression. You don't fight a tyrant anymore. You negotiate with an algorithm. You refresh, hoping it'll show you something new, something real, something that feels like you. But all it shows you is yourself, the data version, the marketable echo. It keeps feeding you what you already liked until your world shrinks into a hall of mirrors. And I know this sounds dramatic. Maybe you're thinking, Rick, it's just entertainment. What's the harm? Well, the harm is that when everything's entertainment, nothing matters. We've turned politics into a reality show, love into a transaction, education into content. Even tragedy gets edited for engagement. The system doesn't suppress tragedy, it monetizes it. You scroll past a famine, then an ad, then a meme, all flattened into the same digital wallpaper. Suffering doesn't shock us anymore, it just interrupts the feed. But here's the paradox. The more the system tries to please us, the emptier we feel. We chase stimulation because meaning has gone missing. We mistake constant input for connection, noise for purpose. And the cruelest part? We blame ourselves for feeling numb. Maybe I'm just burned out, we say. No, you're not burned out. You're overexposed. You've been overstimulated into silence. You don't need more pleasure. You need truth, and truth doesn't trend. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I imagine what silence must have felt like 100 years ago before the machine started whispering. A silence with weight, with room for thought. We've lost that. Now, even silence hums with Wi-Fi. And in that hum, we forget what it means to simply be. The system's greatest victory isn't that it distracts us, it's that we've learned to fear boredom more than meaninglessness. People often ask me, so what do we do, Rick? Smash our phones? Move to the woods? No, that's too easy. I'm not preaching purity, I'm preaching awareness. The only real rebellion left is attention. To look at the world, really look without the filters, without the algorithms telling you what to see. To reclaim the part of your mind that can still sit still, still feel, still ache for something real. Because power today doesn't need to break you, it just needs to keep you comfortable. It will wrap you in convenience, drown you in entertainment, and call it progress. You won't notice the cage because the door's made of glass and the inside's got good Wi-Fi. But if you can see the bars, if you can feel the quiet horror beneath the noise, then maybe, just maybe, you can start to live again. And listen, I'm not saying I've escaped it. I watch the same shows, check the same feeds, get lost in the same seductive fog. But sometimes, in the middle of all that noise, I remember to look up, to feel the absurdity of it, to laugh at my own obedience. That small laugh that's freedom's faint heartbeat. So if you're hearing this, don't switch off the world. Just notice it. Notice how power learned to smile, how it replaced the whip with a wink, how it doesn't silence you, it just keeps you entertained. And if that realization ever keeps you awake at night, sitting in the blue glow of another endless scroll, good. Stay awake a little longer. That's where freedom begins. Again, not by running away from the system, but by seeing exactly how beautifully it has seduced you and refusing, quietly, to fall asleep. You know, people like to think rebellion looks exciting, fists in the air, crowds in the streets, slogans echoing through the city. But I've seen real rebellion, and it's quieter. It happens in a room at 2 a.m. when a person finally stops repeating what they've been told and starts thinking. That's the moment the system starts to shake. Because a person who can think for themselves, really think, is someone you can't fully control. And that scares power more than a million loud opinions. We've been tricked into believing that thinking is just a mental hobby, something professors do between coffee breaks. But that's nonsense. Thinking, real thinking, is a form of war. It tears through illusions. It dismantles comfort. It threatens everything built on obedience. That's why people avoid it. It's painful. It's lonely. It's the opposite of entertainment. But it's also the only way left to resist a world that wants to keep you comfortable, distracted, and harmless. I've taught philosophy long enough to know that most students come into class looking for answers. They want to map some structure that'll make life less confusing. But philosophy isn't about maps. It's about setting fire to them. Socrates didn't hand out answers, he handed out headaches. He asked questions that corroded certainty. That's why they killed him. You start asking too many questions, and sooner or later, someone with authority will decide you've become a problem. And yet, that's where life begins, at the moment when you stop believing and start doubting. Thinking is dangerous because it threatens every cozy little story that keeps us obedient. You start wondering, why should I work myself to death for a job that doesn't care if I live or die? Why should I buy this thing I don't need? Why should I trust a culture that calls distraction freedom? And the minute you ask those questions, you're not asleep anymore. You've broken the spell. Foucault once said, power isn't just what represses you, it's what defines you, shapes your desires, teaches you how to speak. And philosophy, for me, is the art of speaking in a language power can't quite predict. It's the refusal to let the vocabulary of the system dictate the limits of your thought. Because once they've colonized your language, they've colonized your mind. And you can't fight for freedom using the words of your captors. But let me tell you something, honest thinking hurts. It hurts like pulling a splinter from your brain. You realize how many lies you've swallowed just to get through the day. You realize that most of what passes for common sense is just cultural programming with better marketing. And yet, that pain, that little shock of awareness is where freedom hides. Nietzsche said, we are not yet thinking. He was right. We spend our lives reacting, not reflecting. We drown in information, but starve for insight. We call it being informed, but what we really are is managed. Sometimes, when I'd lecture about critical theory, I'd see that flicker in a student's eyes, that moment of recognition, when the words stop being academic and start being personal. That's what philosophy should do. It should burn through the polite surface of things and hit you in the gut. Philosophy isn't about memorizing what dead men said. It's about realizing that they were trying to talk to you to pull you out of the trance of your own culture. And don't misunderstand me, I'm not glorifying misery. Thinking doesn't mean you have to become bitter or cynical. It means you take life seriously enough to stop lying to yourself. It means you refuse to confuse noise with meaning. In an age where everything's designed to keep you scrolling, zoning out, consuming, the act of sitting down, taking a breath, and asking why is revolutionary. There's a line from Adorno, he said, that the task of philosophy is not to fit into the world, but to resist it. That's what I believe, too. Philosophy should be uncomfortable. It should be impolite. It should make you question the things you love most, not to destroy them, but to love them truthfully. Real thinking is not safe, because the truth isn't safe. But it's the only thing that can still wake us up from this endless carnival of distraction. I sometimes think about how history treats thinkers. We celebrate them long after we've silenced them. Jesus, Socrates, Marx, even Nietzsche, all punished in life, sanitized in death. Once a dangerous idea becomes a quote on a coffee mug, it's no longer a threat. The system is clever like that. It takes the language of rebellion and turns it into merchandise. That's why resistance has to stay alive, has to keep thinking, keep changing, keep refusing to be packaged. And yet, resistance doesn't have to look heroic. Sometimes it's as simple as refusing to look away. Reading something difficult when everyone else wants easy answers. Listening to silence when everyone else wants noise. Being present when the world keeps begging you to drift. Thinking doesn't make you famous. It won't make you rich, but it'll make you real. If you ever want to know how deep the control runs, just watch how the world treats those who stop playing along. The thinker is mocked as pretentious, the skeptic is negative, the questioner is annoying. That's because the system depends on your compliance, not your consciousness. It's terrified of quiet people who are awake. And I'll confess something, even I get tired. I sit here, talking about resistance, and some nights I feel the same pull to tune out, to let it all wash over me. I'm not immune. None of us are. The system's seduction is too smooth. But then I remember why I started teaching in the first place. Not to pass on information, but to pass on discomfort. To remind people that thinking slow, painful, honest thinking is still possible, even now, especially now. So if you're listening, don't mistake thought for cynicism. Don't confuse awareness with despair. To think is to care enough to face the mess without flinching. That's the real rebellion. You don't need a manifesto. You need the courage to stay conscious in a world built on sleep. And when the night gets quiet and your mind starts to wander, don't reach for the next distraction. Sit with the silence. Let the questions come. They'll hurt a little. They always do. But that's how freedom sounds when it first starts to whisper. Because thinking real, honest thinking is the last act of rebellion left. And maybe the most human one, too. You want to know the cruelest joke of modern life? We don't live our lives anymore, we market them. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean that the line between who you are and what you promote has dissolved like cheap ink in water. Somewhere between the first commercial and the last selfie, the soul became a slogan. And you know what's funny? We don't even find that tragic. We call it branding. We call it content. We call it being authentic. But authenticity, real authenticity, died the moment it became a strategy. There was a time when being yourself meant something. It was dangerous, uncertain, maybe even lonely. It meant carving out an identity against the grain of culture, not within it. Now it's a sales pitch. The system took our hunger for meaning and turned it into a marketing demographic. You can buy your individuality in installments now. A curated playlist, a thrifted jacket, a raw, unfiltered post that took 3 hours to stage. Even rebellion got commodified. Punk is a museum piece. Counterculture is a hashtag. You can be as radical as you want as long as it sells. Nietzsche once said, "Become who you are." Try saying that today, and an algorithm will translate it into "find your personal brand." The marketplace has invaded the self so completely that we no longer ask who we are, we ask what version of ourselves will perform best. And the tragedy is that we call this freedom. We celebrate the illusion of choice while our identities are being templated, optimized, and monetized. We've confused exposure with expression and performance with personhood. Everywhere you look, the language of commerce seeps into the language of being. Invest in yourself. Grow your personal platform. Invest in yourself. Monetize your passion. We speak in the dialect of markets even when we talk about our souls. The culture whispers, "Don't just exist, sell yourself better." And we oblige, polishing our edges, smoothing our anger, turning our private moments into public theater. We've become entrepreneurs of our own image, CEOs of a corporation called me. And like every corporation, we chase growth at the cost of truth. You might think I'm exaggerating, but look around. People document experiences not to live them, but to prove they happened. Vacations, meals, emotions, all pre-packaged for consumption. The self becomes a production studio, and every moment is potential footage. Even pain gets staged now. You can suffer online, but it better be aesthetic. You can cry, but make sure the lighting's good. The system has found a way to turn even vulnerability into engagement metrics. Authenticity has become a performance of imperfection. What's sinister about this isn't just the fakery, it's the way it feels real. Baudrillard called it the simulacrum. Copies without originals. We no longer imitate reality. We imitate other imitations until there's nothing left underneath. You can spend your whole life playing yourself and never meet the person behind the act. And the more you perform, the emptier you get, because every performance erases a little bit of what was spontaneous, private, alive. And irony, oh, irony became the ultimate defense. It's safer to mock sincerity than risk being sincere. The ironic self is untouchable, protected by quotation marks and smirks. We laugh at everything, so nothing can hurt us. But that armor has a price. You can't feel much through it. When everything's a joke, even love starts to sound ridiculous. The system loves that. Irony keeps you detached, manageable. A sincere person is dangerous. You can't predict someone who truly believes in something. When I talk about this in lectures, people get uncomfortable. They say, "But Rick, isn't self-expression a good thing?" Of course it is, until it's packaged, optimized, and sold back to you as lifestyle content. Capitalism doesn't kill ideals by suppressing them. It kills them by absorbing them. You want rebellion? Here's a t-shirt. You want freedom? Here's a subscription. You want authenticity? Here's a brand guide. The system doesn't need to fight your individuality. It just needs to monetize it until it stops threatening anyone. Sometimes I wonder if we even remember what an unmediated moment feels like. to experience something and not think about how it looks, to say something true without calculating its reception, to love someone without packaging it for display. We've been trained to perform constantly, to curate ourselves in real time. Even solitude has been invaded. You can't be alone anymore without the ghost audience of your imagined followers. Privacy isn't private, it's just content you haven't posted yet. I know this all sounds bleak, and it is, because we've built a civilization that confuses visibility with existence. You're not real until you're seen. You're not valuable until you're liked. And if you vanish from the feed, you may as well not exist at all. We used to fear death, now we fear irrelevance. It's the new mortality, the death of engagement, the end of being noticed, and it's killing something deeper than the body. It's killing the soul's quiet need to simply be. But maybe, just maybe, there's a way back. I don't mean a grand revolution, no manifestos or manifest destiny. I mean the smallest acts of refusal. The courage to be boring, to be quiet, to be unseen, to have a thought and keep it to yourself, to feel something you don't immediately post about. That's the new radicalism, to live a moment that belongs to no one else, to reclaim the right to be unmarketable. Authenticity isn't a product, it's a presence. It's not something you show, it's something you practice. It's not about being transparent, it's about being real enough to stop performing transparency for applause. Maybe it starts with admitting that we're tired of pretending, tired of optimizing, tired of being interesting. Maybe real authenticity begins when we finally drop the act and whisper, "I don't know who I am without the noise." And if that sounds fragile, good. Fragility is the last trace of the real in us. The system can't sell it, can't bottle it, can't brand it, not yet. That's why it matters. Because sincerity now is the new rebellion. To mean what you say, to love without irony, to feel without broadcasting. That's not nostalgia, that's defiance. So if you're listening and you felt that quiet exhaustion, that dull ache behind all the performance, you're not alone. I feel it too. I think most of us do, though we hide it behind our curated smiles. Maybe tonight, after the screens go dark, you'll sit there for a minute in the silence and realize you don't have to sell yourself anymore. You can just exist. Imperfect, unfiltered, unbranded. And in that stillness, maybe you'll catch the faint sound of something returning, something we used to call being human. You know, I've spent most of my life talking about what's wrong with the world, how we've been trained, seduced, distracted, sold, packaged, and branded until we forgot what breathing without purpose even feels like. But at some point, the question has to change. It can't always be what broke us. It has to become what's left of us. Because beneath all the noise, the algorithms, the slogans, there's still something beating in there, something messy, fragile, terrified, and magnificent. We used to call it being human. You see, the problem isn't that we become evil or stupid, it's that we become numb. The system doesn't ask you to be cruel, it asks you to stop feeling. Because if you really felt, you might stop participating. You might look around and realize this whole structure depends on our numbness. The endless scrolling, the busy routines, the polite small talk, it's anesthesia, civilization as sedation. And philosophy for me was always a kind of shock therapy. It doesn't comfort, it wakes you up. It says, hey, look, this hurts because you're alive. I've always thought that to be human is to wrestle with contradiction. We are animals pretending to be gods, machines pretending to have souls. We destroy what we love and love what destroys us. That tension is unbearable, so we escape it. We build ideologies, religions, entertainment industries, all designed to distract us from the impossible truth that we're temporary. But the goal was never to escape the human condition, it was to face it. To look straight into the absurdity and still choose to live. Camus said that's the only real act of defiance left. To imagine Sisyphus happy, pushing his rock, knowing it's meaningless, and smiling anyway. And yet, we've forgotten how to smile without posing, how to feel without performing. The modern world has taught us to outsource every emotion. Joy comes in packages. Anger comes in comment sections. Grief comes with a subscription. We've outsourced our very capacity to feel alive. But here's the secret the market doesn't want you to know. Real feeling can't be sold. It happens in the quiet, unphotographed moments, the kind that don't trend. It happens when you stop trying to optimize your existence and start simply experiencing it. I sometimes think the greatest rebellion now isn't political or technological, it's emotional. To feel deeply in a shallow age is an act of resistance. To care when apathy is fashionable is radical. Because if obedience is built on indifference, then the first step to reclaiming your humanity is to start giving a damn again. About something, about someone, about yourself. Maybe not as a brand, but as a being. The machine can simulate everything but compassion. It can mimic intelligence, art, conversation, but not care. So maybe that's where we start rebuilding, with care, with the quiet, unprofitable tenderness that keeps the species from eating itself alive. When I was younger, I thought rebellion meant shouting louder. Now I think it means listening harder. Listening to the world that's been buried under the static. Listening to the parts of yourself that you muted because they weren't productive. To resist obedience isn't just to disobey orders, it's to remember what your own voice sounds like when it isn't quoting someone else. You'd be amazed how foreign your own thoughts can feel once you strip away the noise. And don't mistake what I'm saying for some hippie sermon about getting back to nature. I'm not talking about running off to the woods and meditating. I'm talking about getting back to your nature, the part of you that still remembers how to laugh without irony, to cry without shame, to want something that can't be measured in likes or dollars. Because that's what this age has stolen most effectively, our right to be uncalculated, to just be without purpose, to exist without monetizing that existence. We've reached this strange point where even despair has become stylized. People post their existential crises like product launches, perfectly worded, emotionally optimized, digestible. And I get it, it's not hypocrisy, it's survival. We're trying to stay visible in a world that erases anything not profitable. But visibility isn't the same as existence. You can be seen by millions and still vanish inside yourself. You can be liked and still unloved. You can be followed and still completely lost. So how do we become human again? Not by rejecting the world, but by re-entering it, honestly. By refusing to play dead while alive. By reclaiming all the parts of ourselves we traded for convenience, our boredom, our anger, our curiosity, our longing. By remembering that being alive isn't supposed to feel efficient, it's supposed to feel real. And real is messy. It's contradictory. It's not a straight line, it's a cracked mirror reflecting too many truths at once. But that's the point. The cracks are what make the light visible. I think the philosophers I love, Nietzsche, Marx, Kierkegaard, Foucault, they were all saying the same thing in their own ways. Wake up, not just politically, but existentially. Wake up to the fact that you're more than a consumer, more than a demographic, more than a username. You are a consciousness with the capacity to ask why. And the moment you start asking it sincerely, relentlessly, you start to reclaim something sacred. The ability to live instead of being lived through. Maybe the goal isn't happiness. Maybe it's aliveness. Happiness is too small, too marketable. Aliveness is riskier. It's grief and ecstasy in the same breath. It's loving something that might break you, believing in something that might fail. But that's what makes it human. Machines don't risk heartbreak. They don't doubt. They don't hope. We do. And that's why, despite everything, I still believe in us. You know, sometimes after class, when the students would leave and the room went quiet, I'd sit there alone for a while, the chalk dust hanging in the air, the echo of questions that never got answered. And I'd think, maybe that's what it means to be human, to keep asking even when there's no one left to listen. To keep searching even when you know the map is wrong. To keep feeling even when the world tells you to stop. Because that stubborn persistence, that refusal to go numb, is the only proof we have that we're still alive. So no, the final step isn't despair. It's awakening. It's the moment you realize you don't need permission to exist as a full, flawed, feeling creature again. And maybe you'll fail at it, maybe you'll fall back into the noise I do all the time. But that's okay. Because every time you wake up again, every time you remember the taste of real life, unfiltered, unbranded, unrepeatable, you reclaim a little piece of what the system tried to take. You reclaim your humanity. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the quiet revolution we've been waiting for, not to change the world, but to remember how to feel it again. To live fiercely, freely, and consciously, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Because that's the cost of being human. And honestly, it's still the best deal we've got.